Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, I'm so glad you're listening to Life Support. It's great to have you here. What we do on this show is we love to tell stories. We love to hear how God is changing lives. And we talk so much in churches about eternal life, which is awesome. It's fantastic. But we also need to get the word out that God changes lives here on this planet right now. He transforms people. And we're going to hear from one of those today. His name is Wayne Bugg. He's the executive director of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, Twin Cities. And there's a lot going on there. You shared your story last time. I'm so glad you're back. And I'm going to do a quick summary, okay? This is like a paraphrase in a bad version of the Bible, okay? You grew up in a tough part of Chicago. Your parents were into drugs. I love the way you described that, too. You didn't sound bitter. You didn't sound disrespectful at all. You thought you were going to get a new lease on life with your aunt. You ended up in Gary, Indiana, not the garden spot of the world, right? So same issues.
Not Fresh Prince.
Right, that's right. Fresh, yeah, that'd be like a remake. And so then your a friend wanted you to come and live up here in Minneapolis, and you ended up in North Minneapolis, once again, not the garden spot of the world, but that's really where God got a hold of you, isn't it?
Yes.
And now you're working on those very same streets, helping people. What does that feel like when you get up in the morning and you say, I'm going to go to the places I once, as a kid, haunted, so to speak, and I'm going to help people?
Yeah. It's the redemption story, right? That's God, how he does things. And I tell people that I'm a survivor of Lake Street. At one place that I used to sell drugs and be part of violence, that God has me part of rebuilding a wall, kind of like Nehemiah. And so that God would, again, I think I mentioned before, would take my pain and give me a purpose out of it. And so it gives me pleasure to be able to, not for my legacy, not to be that of my teenage years, that he's giving me an opportunity to right some wrongs, and not that I can take away the pain that I cause people or things of that nature, but to be able to hopefully provide some hope and guidance and direction for some people that may be on a similar pathway.
Yeah. The area that you're working is close to the areas where these famous riots happened. I think it gets a little blown out of proportion. Everybody thinks that all of Minneapolis burned down. That really isn't true. But there was some significant damage in the area down there, and probably adversely affected people who live there. But you've got to deal with all ages, and you're dealing with teenagers, you're dealing with all ages. For those of us that live in the suburbs, what kinds of things are these people dealing with? Like, what are their daily challenges in their lives?
I think, despair, a lack of hope. I think people who move in these communities, or move to America, right, move to Minneapolis, you want to believe the sky's the limit. But then you begin to see the reality that, the limit's the sky. There's these blockages that prevent you from thriving. Environments matter. And so when you're in an environment where everybody's struggling, over a period of time, it can wear you down. The Bible talks about, like, if you're around angry people, then you'll be angry. Another bad paraphrase. But likewise, I think as far as hope, if you're around people that don't have hope. And so, so there's not a lot of places there where you can have a career. There's a lot of small businesses, family owned, but as far as like a career, career or just really right now, probably the focal point is like safety. That, you have those that are unhoused and those that are dealing and things of that nature. So you got kids that's walking to school, they have to step over needles and condoms, block out the noise of the dealers and the pimps and all of these different factors that other people may not have to deal with. So in order to get to what people would deem success, whatever that is, that you have to become immune or something to all of these exterior factors,
right?
And a lot of and which is difficult. because it's before your very eyes. And so how can you walk through it and it not get on you?
Well, especially when probably some of those are your family members or your parents even.
Correct.
And you have to deal with that when you get home if you're a kid coming home from school, right?
Yes.
Just like what you had to deal with.
Yeah.
So that kind of destroys this narrative that, well, you know what? Everybody has the same chance in America.
Yeah.
But that's not really true, is it? If you grow up in that area, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome.
There's extremely difficult hurdles to overcome. I mean, and you'll get into all the statistical things about like achievement gaps and all of the different real things that happen. I mean, the rent is high in these places, and sometimes you find a person who's a single parent, and so they work in 1 or 2 jobs in order to put a roof over their child's head, which means they can't be at home to help the kids with homework or protect them from predators and things of that nature. And so there's just so many factors that's unequitable, if you want to call it as such, in these spaces that produce negative results in the lives of those that are experiencing them or living there. And so, I think that's where, if you ask me, but that's where I believe the church can come in and, provide some level of assistance for some of these families that are going through those moments. And, previously I talked about how St. Vincent de Paul, this church organization, positioned themselves in an inner city to serve, where it would have been more profitable for them to go to the suburbs, but they said, we're going to serve here. And it ended up being a spot where I got a job, but also people were able to pour into me because I hung around these volunteers and they bestowed esteem on me, which eventually launched me to go back to school and things of that nature. And so it's definitely a place that's void of that, and no disrespect to the churches that are in those spaces, but I think that there's more opportunities.
Do you feel abandoned by suburban people?
Woo!
It's okay. This is a safe place.
This is a safe place.
Yeah.
That was one of the difficult things about George Floyd, really.
Yeah.
I talked about, again, this transformative story that I had about God and, his love for me and the people that had a love for me. But in that moment, I felt abandoned. Like the frustration, and that really don't even best grasp what I felt when he died, and there was no anger, about that situation. And that same perspective that I had, I think sometimes in the inner city I see stuff and there's not the same anger about it, right? And I think about the story about the Good Samaritan a lot of times, where this person who was left on the road for dead, and this Samaritan, in those days, basically this unchurched person was the one that responded to the need. But all of these church folks walked right on over. Yep. And so sometimes I feel that way about some of the stuff, and I guess some of it is proximity, because I'm there, I see it.
Right.
So I would just encourage people who don't believe that narrative, that these experiences aren't valid, to come and volunteer at a place like St. Vincent de Paul or any other organization that's in the inner city, because the gospel, based upon what I understood it to believe when I first got saved, was transformative. And as I began to read Jesus' words and the Holy Spirit endowed me with power, I changed. And I believe the same can be for the people that I come in contact with. Yeah. But I don't think that there's enough engagement with the church from the suburbs, or even someone from the inner city, to come outside those walls and to engage with those.
I appreciate you being honest about that. I know some pastors who, when that happened, began to talk about it in their suburban churches. And some of them got in trouble. It was the whole thing of like, my pastor's gone and woke kind of thing.
Yes.
And so it was difficult because, I write these daily devotions to my congregation every day. Mm-hmm. And I took this opportunity with George Floyd. I didn't talk really specifically about him as much as, listen, we got to pay attention to justice. Justice is all over the Bible. Yeah. I thought this was a no-brainer. I was quoting prophets. I was quoting Solomon. You're like, how can anybody argue with this? People left the church.
Yeah.
So we have to have courage enough to continue to talk about these things because they do matter. And at the same time, I feel bad that you feel like you're kind of alone down there. And that's why it's good that we're talking about this now. So, you're going to give contact information and so forth. I think there are people in the suburbs that care, but they don't know what's going on, number one. They're afraid. They're even afraid to go there.
Yeah.
Whether that's, I don't know, it's probably overblown as well, but you know the area. But this is a safe place for them to go. This would be a great opportunity.
Yes.
Because you're not going to put them in harm's way, right?
Correct. Yeah, you'll be inside,
Yeah.
right? And so there's, but people from the outside will come in.
Yeah.
Right? And so there'll be opportunity to minister to them. Just when I was leaving today, there was a young lady who was struggling with addiction, who needed to change her clothes, and we gave her a change of clothes for free. Quite often, this is an opportunity to talk to them, to hear their story, not necessarily to get them saved in that moment, but an opportunity to establish a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the church has an opportunity to utilize relationships by continuing to be there. I talked in the previous post or podcast about Pastor Larry and Thomas and how they came to the thrift store regularly bothering me, loving on me. And then eventually I gave in and said, let me come check out your church. And I think that's, to a degree that what it may take. And so a level of investment. And I think you mentioned that word earlier, that not just telling people that God loves them, but showing them.
One of our first guests on this podcast was a man by the name of Johnny Turnipseed. You know John?
I heard about him.
You know of John?
I know of John.
So it's, he's got a long story, but he ran gangs in the 90s, some of the gangs that are still there. John had a miraculous release from prison and did amazing things with his life. But he would look right at me and I would ask him, like, what's wrong with the inner city? He'd say, no fathers. No fathers. So how do we rectify that problem?
How long we got?
We have 8 minutes to solve the problems of the world.
I do think that it's a real situation. But, going back to justice and looking back and see where some of that, stem from. And so, you go back to like the welfare, and growing up, I didn't know any of this. I just experienced it, but I didn't have a clue of why. So like to find out that like in order to get welfare back in the day, the father couldn't be in a home. Even to the point where the welfare people would come to the home and check the women's closets to make sure that there was no men's clothes in there.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Right? So you get men who were poor who say, you know what, I'm going to sacrifice my manhood to make sure that my family's taken care of.
See, I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
So the system was driving men out of the homes.
Correct. And so you have these men who did this, and just say, speaking about Gary, who was steel mill, right?
Yeah.
So you have men who lost their job. Now they lost their family, and they don't have anywhere to go. So they're hanging out on a stoop, and there's liquor stores on every corner. So now they begin to drink and find themselves just they've lost their purpose. They lost their drive, their meaning for living. Yeah. And so then they find themselves doing criminal activity to survive to a degree. And also they've received a lot from the devil as far as again about their identity. And so I think so you got that part. I think there's a systemic issue. But then I think culturally speaking, at some point it became okay to be a baby daddy. Where having multiple kids with multiple women was something that was looked at as okay. Thank God for the man who came to me at church and said either marry this woman or leave her alone. Wow. That kind of forced my hand.
Yeah, what wisdom.
Yeah, what wisdom. Yep. Yeah, which is a tough conversation. Yeah. And so I think there's an opportunity to redeem it. And then this last one, I look at the church and I say, church people need to make marriage remarkable, right? Where it's something whatever it exemplifies a desire to want to do it. Why would I want to get married? I see my mom and dad argue all the time.
Yeah.
they hate each other.
Yeah.
Right. So why would I get married? And I think that's the part that I think, as far as being in church these last 15 years, that they say, statistically speaking, like, church divorce is almost the same as the world's.
Yeah. Very close.
Very close. And,
Yeah.
and so I think
that's a sad commentary.
Yes.
And I think that one of the issues there is we need to talk about why marriage matters to God.
Mm.
We need to talk more about that marriage is, exemplifies his love for the church.
Mm.
The intimacy in marriage reflects the intimacy in the Trinity. It's all very precious to God.
Mm.
He gave us marriage so we would understand more about how much he loves us. And when we don't talk about it that way, then people just go, yeah, why not just live together? Why not, what's the point? Well, if you really want to discover what God has for you, marriage is where you do it. It's not easy.
Mm-mm.
It's not easy.
Not at all.
I'm sure for you it is, not necessarily for the rest of us.
Yeah,
but it's worth it because you begin to develop those kinds of things in your relationship with your spouse, and you learn how to get through hard times together.
Yeah.
And that's so even more. We need guys like you down there in different places in our city doing what you're doing. Do you have a chance to interact with people in this way on a day-to-day basis there?
Yeah. So my kids go to Hope Academy, which is on Chicago and Franklin, in South Minneapolis. And so I'm part of a men's group there. We meet the first Saturday of the month. And so to talk about some of these things, particularly specific to men, that a lot of times men don't get to talk about. I think that's another issue with men, that we've been taught as kids not to share our emotions and things of that nature. So we just suffer in silence until it's too much for us to take, and then we leave. And so to provide safe spaces for men to talk about it. And then again, just, thank God for St. Vincent de Paul, where because it's a faith-based organization, that there's liberty and freedoms to talk about those things. So when men come in with a voucher, which church or some organization will give them a shot for free, if they want to talk about certain things, I have liberty to do it. But also to talk to the people that's doing community service there because they did some crime, or the people that we've hired from the city or the community that has different issues that's going on. Working with one of the employees right now, helping them get some parenting certificates and things of that nature. And so yep, the Lord, again, another one of those things that was pain, because part of my story that I didn't talk about, before I married my wife, we were at odds, and so I had to pay child support. I had supervised visitation, so I know what that looks like, and so I know what it looks like to fight for your child, and so and relatively successful at it, I was able to get some of those rights that I wanted. But then able to share those things with the men and say, I know that the world may be telling you that your kids you shouldn't fight for. If she wants a kid, let her have a kid. But I'm telling you, this is what God has called you to do, and you have the ability to walk it out in a way that glorifies God.
Yeah, and again, you're using your background to develop that credibility, and the system.
Yes.
So that's a huge help.
Yeah.
All right, tell me a little bit more about the organization. It's an amazing organization, and there's a lot more going on than just the thrift store.
Yeah, this is a place, man, that talking about the story about the Good Samaritan, that when they see individuals in need, they respond. And so St. Vincent de Paul himself was a priest a long, long time ago who felt a call to serve the inner city, and he took a vow to serve those that were poor. And so now here it is, almost 200 years or 2,000 years later, I don't know, a long time, that as parishioners are in church and they want to serve people, how do I do it, right? Because that's what we were talking about earlier. Is you got people in the suburbs. I want to do it, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I need an on-ramp.
Yeah.
And St. Vincent de Paul is that. And so when a church will call us and say, okay, we got people in the church that want to serve. And so we come there and we train them. So we have we called it the Ozanam Orientation, which is the founder of our organization, Frederick Ozanam. And it's and we walk them through when somebody calls to the church and they need help, instead of pastor going out, the parishioners goes out, right? So they have to put their faith into action, and it allows the pastor to do some other amazing things. And as they go they go to the home 2 by 2. So we train them how to do a home visit and what that engagement looks like, and how to build esteem, how to build relationship, and how to be safe, and things of that nature. And so St. Vincent de Paul is an international organization, but I oversee the Archdiocese of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Like I said, around 300 volunteers, about 15 different parishes, and it's amazing. and I get people who call a thrift store and says I need my rent paid and I don't got no one to turn to, and I can call one of those parishes and have them contact that person, and they'll send 2 people to go out to investigate, to give them a way of a dignified way of help, instead of sending them to a social service agency where they sit at an area for a waiting area for 2 hours and then finally get up there with their number to find out that they don't have the right paperwork. They need to go back home and come back tomorrow. We come to the people. I compare it to Jesus going to see Zacchaeus.
Yeah.
Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your home today, and I think that there's something special about it when we bring the Spirit of God, the glory of God, to somebody's home.
Yeah, you can offer them Christ.
Amen.
Not just help, but
Not
Christ
just help.
too.
Yes, correct.
So that's amazing. It's interesting when you told your story. That happened a few years ago, and now you're describing today. Human nature is still the same.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the same problems, maybe they look a little different.
Yeah.
But people still need Christ.
Yes.
That's what it comes down
Yes.
to. And neighborhoods need Christ. Cities
Yes.
need Christ.
Yes.
So you're a wonderful light to have. How can we contact the organization if people want to get involved?
Yeah. My email, wbugg, B-U-G-G, at svdp for St. Vincent de Paul, mpls.org. That's my email. Send me an email. And our website, svdpmpls.org. Contact
a lot
me.
of letters there. You got that down, though.
Yeah. So
say that 5 times.
St. Vincent de Paul, so SVDP. So.
You're doing a great job. Thanks so much for letting us know what's going on there.